I can still feel the chill from that night, the way the fog curled around the broken fence posts of the old farm, and how the pale moonlight barely touched the hollow windows of the barn. I had come here hoping for quiet, a little escape from the hum of the city, but something about the place felt off, as if it had been waiting for me. The air was thick, almost tasting of damp earth, and something older, something unsettled. I remember the faint creak of the gate, the rustle of dead leaves underfoot, and how even the wind seemed hesitant to move. Every step I took echoed in a silence that wasn't natural, a silence heavy with presence. I thought I saw shadows flit across the edges of the fog, subtle, almost shy, yet unmistakably alive. And then there was a humming, low, like it was coming from the very walls themselves, soft and steady, almost like a warning. My heart slowed. My mind whispered that I should leave, but curiosity rooted me to the ground. That's when I saw it, a shape, pale and wavering, standing at the edge of the field, just beyond the reach of the light. It didn't move at first, and then it smiled. The wind had been soft at first. A pale light filtered through broken windows. The barn smelled of old wood and damp straw. I stepped inside. My boots stirred dust that had lain untouched for years. It floated in pale shafts of moonlight, tiny motes that seemed almost alive. A rocking chair shifted, alone, slow, deliberate, as if someone invisible had just risen. I swallowed, feeling the air thicken. It smelled faintly of iron, of something wet. The floor creaked beneath my weight, and I felt it, not just underfoot, but behind my eyes, a sudden tension. Soft whispers lingered, almost at the edges of hearing. I couldn't understand. They wound through the rafters, brushing my ears, curling around the beams. Shadows moved along the walls. Not quite shapes I recognized, but familiar enough to make me blink, to question. I reached out. My fingers trembled in the cold air. The chair rocked again. The whispering grew closer. Not louder, closer. Every inhalation felt thick, heavy, like breathing through water. I froze. A gust of wind brought the smell of hay and rot. Something brushed against my arm. I jerked, but no one was there. The floorboards groaned under a weight that wasn't mine. Soft footsteps, maybe, or maybe the barn itself was moving. I could almost feel eyes on me, though the shadows held no face. I turned slowly. The moonlight fractured across broken glass, and then a shadow flitted across the far wall. It was small, frail, but deliberate, every movement measured, as if it was waiting for me to notice. I wanted to speak, to call out, but my voice caught. The whispers coiled around my chest, pressing, teasing. I could hear a name, but it wasn't mine, not anyone I knew. The rocking chair slowed, stopped. A silence fell, soft, thick, almost warm. And yet the whisper lingered. It hummed in the corners, under the beams, in the cracks of the wood. I stepped closer, drawn despite myself. Dust swirled at my feet, rising like fog. The smell of wet earth mixed with the iron tang again. Something in the corner moved, a shadow that didn't belong. I blinked. It was gone. The whispers circled me, weaving patterns my mind couldn't follow. I shivered, though the air was still. A soft breath, not mine, tickled my neck. I could see the rocking chair now, pale in the moonlight, empty, yet something lingered there, a sense of waiting. I wanted to run, but the floor seemed to slow my steps. Every movement felt heavier. The whispers pressed closer, gentle, insistent. I touched the wall, cold, rough, alive in a way that shouldn't be possible. The shadows shifted as if they were breathing. And then, just for a moment, everything stilled. No wind, no dust, no whisper. A single, fragile voice whispered again. It said a name I'd never heard. Soft, like it had been waiting for me all along. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I could only feel it, an invisible weight, a presence, watching, patient, and very near. The barn groaned once more. The rocking chair rocked just a little, almost imperceptibly, and then silence swallowed everything again. I stepped back. The moonlight cut the air like a knife. And still, the whisper followed. Not loud, not angry, curious, patient, I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. The barn had me, and it wanted its name heard. The fog lay heavy across the fields. Each blade of grass vanished into gray. I could barely see my own hands in front of me. The old silo loomed ahead. Its silhouette was jagged against the pale moon. A faint glow flickered inside, pulsing slowly, almost breathing. I stepped forward. The ground was wet beneath my boots, cold and soft. Each step echoed, another step answered, just behind me. Alone, I reminded myself of that. Yet the echo kept pace, perfect and deliberate. Rustling moved through the underbrush. Something shifted, just beyond sight. I could feel it watching. The air smelled of damp earth and old metal. The fog curled around me, brushing my skin. My breath came out in soft, trembling clouds. The glow from the silo grew stronger, pale and rhythmic. It called me. Though I didn't want to go, a shadow passed across the wall, gone before I could fully see it. My pulse quickened, though my body stayed still. I reached the edge of the fog. The air was thick, clinging to my face. The rustling followed, never constant, always just enough to unsettle. Each step forward made my boots heavier. The echo of steps still behind me, keeping pace. I tried to convince myself it was only my mind. The silo's door was dark, empty, yet alive with light. A faint hum hummed in the fog, almost beneath hearing. I could feel it in my chest, vibrating softly. A shadow flickered at the window, quick, fleeting, gone before I blinked. I froze. The fog pressed close, damp against my skin. The smell of iron rose faintly, as if the earth itself was bleeding. Soft footsteps echoed again. They were mine and yet not. Each step forward pulled the echo closer. I reached the silo. The glow moved inside, pulsing like a heart. I could feel it calling me, quiet, patient. The rustling behind me stopped. The fog was still, holding its breath. I felt eyes where no eyes should be. I wanted to turn back, but something unspoken kept me rooted. The glow drew me in, gentle, irresistible. A single shadow lingered at the edge of the window. I blinked. It was gone. Silence fell over the field. The fog wrapped me tight, damp and soft. I stood alone, yet surrounded. I stepped closer to the silo. The glow pulsed again, slow and steady. The echo of my steps vanished, or joined something else. The air smelled of cold metal and wet soil. I could feel the hum under my skin. The shadow, the echo, they waited. I didn't move. I only breathed and listened. The fog whispered against my face, rustled at my feet, and I felt not fear exactly, curiosity. The glow inside the silo faded slightly, but the pulse remained, soft, persistent. I reached for the door. A breeze stirred the fog. Something flickered at the edge of my vision. It vanished, just like before. I could hear nothing else. Only the hum, only the fog, only my own slow steps, hesitant, reluctant, and yet compelled. The echo had returned, following me still. Alone, not alone. I didn't know which. And I didn't want to. The porch was quiet. The night air was cool, carrying the faint smell of damp wood. Shadows stretched long across the farmhouse walls. The swing hung still at first. Then it creaked, a slow, rhythmic sway in time with the wind. I stepped closer. The wooden boards beneath my feet groaned softly. The air smelled faintly of something sweet, perfume, though no one had been near for years. The swing kept moving, even as the wind stilled. Alone, I watched it glide back and forth, impossibly gentle. My reflection appeared briefly in the chains, distorted, pale, not quite me. I reached out. My fingers hovered near the wood. The swing moved, almost nudging me, yet I felt no touch. A shiver ran down my spine. The porch smelled of cold air and something metallic. The boards whispered beneath my weight. Eyes somewhere in the darkness, watching, patient, from inside the house, where the windows were empty black mirrors. The chains rattled faintly, a rhythm I couldn't follow. The perfume lingered, curling around my senses, making the night feel thicker. I stepped back. The swing slowed but didn't stop. Each motion was deliberate, like it had a mind of its own. The moonlight caught the chains again. My reflection flickered, twisted, unsteady. I blinked, and it was gone. A hush fell over the porch. No wind, no movement, only the faint echo of the swing's rhythm in my ears. I could feel it watching me still. The house itself seemed alive, breathing softly. A presence folded around me, patient, lingering. I leaned closer to the swing. It rocked just slightly in response. A soft, subtle invitation I didn't want to accept. The scent of perfume strengthened. Sweet, almost comforting, and yet wrong, misplaced, unnatural. The boards beneath my feet groaned again. The swing's chains rattled softly. I stepped back once more. The night pressed close. Shadows hugged the corners of the porch. The air smelled of old wood and damp earth. I dared to glance at the windows. Darkness, but heavy, thick, as if eyes were hiding just behind the glass. The swing swayed in silence. No wind, no one there. My reflection appeared once more, fleeting, ghostly. I flinched, stepped back, and it vanished. The porch seemed to breathe around me. Soft, slow, deliberate. The house itself holding its secrets close. The swing moved still, almost imperceptibly now. A subtle rhythm, alive, patient. I could feel it in the quiet between breaths. I wanted to leave, but I stood, drawn, hypnotized by its slow, steady motion. The night smelled of wood and perfume. Shadows shifted. Eyes unseen followed me. I stepped away. The swing continued. Alone yet not. I didn't look back, but the memory stayed. That slow, self-swaying motion. The chains glinting pale in the moonlight. The eyes in the dark. And the scent of perfume, waiting. The farmhouse smelled of old wood and dust. The air was still, thick, almost sticky against my skin. Moonlight spilled through a cracked window, pale and hesitant. I stepped inside the nearest room. The floorboards groaned softly under my weight. A hum pulsed through the walls, faint at first, almost melodic. I paused. The vibration traveled up my arms, through my chest. It felt alive. Dust danced in the shafts of pale light. Spirals and motes swirled slowly. Some shapes, almost human. I moved closer to the center. The hum grew louder, wrapping around me. A lullaby, gentle, insistent, pulling at something deep in my mind. I leaned forward. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on rusted tin. My fingertips tingled, as if the room itself was breathing under my skin. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, gone when I blinked, yet the hum stayed. I stepped back toward the door. The vibration seemed to pulse faster. My boot stirred dust, and it rose in small, fleeting shapes. The air pressed against my face, warm and heavy. The hum, melodic, then discordant, like a whisper turning to warning. I felt my pulse in my ears. I reached the door. It moved, closing silently before my hand touched it. The latch clicked gently, unseen. Alone. The hum filled every corner of the room. It was soft, patient, and endless. I could see shapes in the dust again. Faces, bodies, fleeting, almost kind, then gone. The walls seemed to breathe. I could feel the vibration through my soles, up my spine. The room smelled of old paper and faint iron. I leaned against the frame of the closed door. The hum thrummed stronger, like a heartbeat out of time. The shapes in the dust twisted, fleetingly human, watching. I tried to take a step back. The floor felt heavier. My body moved slower, as if the room itself held me. I could hear my own breath, soft and hesitant. And beneath it, the hum, close, insistent, almost speaking. I closed my eyes. The vibration pressed against my temples. The dust swirled, forming shapes I didn't want to recognize. The air smelled of damp wood and faint perfume, though no one had been here. The hum became a lullaby again, sweet, patient, and wrong. It seemed to pull the edges of the room closer, shrinking the space around me. I opened my eyes. The shapes had sharpened, almost solid. I shivered. The vibration hummed through every bone in my body. The door remained closed. I was trapped by sound, by light, by dust and vibration. I felt alone yet watched. The hum settled into a single note, long and endless. It echoed softly, filling my chest. The shadows in the corners seemed to lean in closer. I wanted to leave. I tried to push against the vibration in the floor, but it held me, patient, insistent, alive. I stayed where I was, breath slow, eyes wide, senses stretched to every corner of the room. The shapes lingered, fleeting, almost gentle. The hum, soft, persistent, curious. And I alone, with the room, the vibration, the shadows and the dust. I didn't move. I only breathed and listened. The barn smelled of dry hay and old wood. Moonlight spilled through gaps in the roof, pale and thin. Dust hung in the air, soft, thick, undisturbed. I climbed the ladder to the loft. Every rung groaned under my weight, echoing in the empty space. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against my skin. The loft was empty. A thick layer of dust covered everything. Yet, I wasn't alone. Eyes glowed in the shadows, faint pale watching. They blinked in unison, slow and deliberate. I froze. The floorboards beneath me groaned again. But no one moved. The air pressed against my neck, icy and sharp. A presence, patient, watching, waiting. I felt it breathe where no breath should be. I whispered, though no one could hear. The eyes vanished. The shadows swallowed them whole. Dust stirred under my boots. A faint rustling drifted from the corners. The moonlight fractured across the beams, casting shifting shapes. I reached out toward the shadows. My fingers trembled in the cold air. The eyes reappeared for a heartbeat, pale and unmoving. Silence pressed down. I could hear my own pulse, slow and uneven. The loft smelled of dry wood and faint decay. Each step I took echoed softly, soft footsteps beneath my boots, and yet another echoed in perfect time. I turned slowly, seeing nothing but shadows and dust. The icy presence pressed closer. It didn't move, yet I felt it there, a weight behind my neck, watching my every breath. The eyes blinked again, faster this time, then gone, leaving only the dim glow of moonlight. I tried to speak. The words caught in my throat. Only my heartbeat answered. The floorboards groaned again, not under my feet, not under anything I could see. The shadows in the corners shifted, subtle, deliberate. Dust spiraled slowly in the pale light. I could almost make out shapes, human, yet wrong. I stepped back. The icy presence remained patient. The eyes lingered at the edge of vision, faint, insistent. I could feel the loft breathing around me, soft, measured, waiting. I leaned against the beam. Dust brushed my fingers, cold and fine. The air smelled of dry hay and iron, faint but unmistakable. The eyes blinked one last time, and vanished. The shadows returned to silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loud. I only listened. The loft held me in its quiet, alone yet not alone, patient, watching, eternal. I stepped down slowly. The ladder groaned. The dust settled behind me, but I felt it still. The presence, the eyes, waiting. The cornfields stretched endlessly. Tall stalks swayed, though the wind was still. The night smelled damp, of soil and rotting leaves. I stepped carefully between the stalks. Every rustle made my chest tighten. It felt like someone was just ahead, moving silently, unseen. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. Human shapes, fleeting, distorted. I blinked, and they dissolved into darkness again. The air pressed against my skin, cool and heavy. I could smell the wet earth beneath the stalks. A faint rustling followed my every step. I tried to listen. The night was silent, yet alive. Every footfall stirred whispers, subtle, almost alive. The corn stalks leaned toward me, curved, swaying as if watching. The shadows deepened, forming shapes I couldn't name. A whisper floated on the breeze, soft, almost gentle. Don't follow. I froze. The stalks quivered. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing in on all sides. I could feel eyes, from where I didn't know, watching, patient, quiet, persistent. The rustling moved with me, sometimes ahead, sometimes beside me, always unseen, always just beyond reach. I took another step. The earth felt soft, almost spongy beneath my boots. The smell of damp leaves rose stronger, curling around me. A shadow moved closer. I turned quickly. Nothing. Just the stalks, swaying, silent, waiting. The whisper came again. Softer now, almost inside my skull. Don't follow. I stopped entirely. Breath shallow, chest tight. The night held me in its quiet. The air smelled faintly metallic now, mixed with wet earth. The rustling grew louder, insistent, as if guiding me. I couldn't see where it came from. I felt the stalks brush my arms. Soft, dry, unnaturally deliberate. The shadows at the edges of vision shifted closer. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted. The whisper pressed against my mind, patient, knowing. The night stretched on, heavy, still. The cornfields moved with subtle life. I felt alone yet watched. The rustling faded slightly. The shapes retreated into darkness. But the whisper lingered, barely audible. Don't follow. I exhaled slowly. The chill of the night seeped into my bones. I stepped backward, leaving the field behind. The shadows stayed just beyond vision. The rustling faded but didn't end. The whisper echoed softly, patient, insistent. I walked slowly. The cornfields held their secrets. And I held the memory of eyes, shadows, and the soft warning in the dark. The kitchen smelled of old wood and faint mildew. The air was thick, heavy with dust. Moonlight fell through the cracked window, pale and hesitant. I opened the pantry door. A full-length mirror leaned against the back wall, cracked, dusty, and still somehow alive. I stepped closer. My reflection lingered even as I moved. It smiled faintly. I did not. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against my skin. I reached out. My fingers trembled. A cold hand pressed against mine. Not my reflection. Not warm. The mirror seemed to breathe. The cracks twisted the light, making shapes flicker across the glass. Dust swirled in the pale beams. I blinked. The reflection blinked first. Not me. The smile lingered. I stepped back slowly. The pantry smelled of old wood and damp air. My breath came out in soft clouds, trembling. The mirror rippled subtly, like water. Shadows leaned close in the corners. A quiet hum pressed at the edges of my hearing. I wanted to step away, but my hand lingered near the glass. The reflection seemed to lean closer. The cold pressed against my skin. I could feel through the cracks, the dust, the air. The reflection moved in ways I could not. A soft, subtle motion. A tilt of the head. A blink, always first. I swallowed. The pantry felt smaller. The shadows thicker, waiting. I reached for the doorknob. The air pressed against my back. Cold and heavy. I could hear my pulse in the silence. The mirror held me. The smile remained. Faint, patient. I let go of the glass. My hand shivered. The reflection stayed. Watching. Waiting. The cracks caught the pale light. The dust swirled, forming shapes almost human, almost familiar. I stepped back, finally. The pantry door closed with a soft click. Alone, the mirror lingered in my vision. The smile faint, persistent. The cold pressing at the edges of memory. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loud. I only felt it. The pantry, the mirror, the reflection. All patient, all waiting. The fog lay thick across the field. It clung to my clothes, to my skin, cold and damp. The night smelled faintly of wet earth and smoke. A lantern swung through the mist. No hand held it, yet it moved in rhythm with my steps. I slowed. The glow dimmed, then brightened again, keeping its distance. Alone, I felt watched. The air was heavy, pressing against my face. The softening of the fog seemed alive. The lantern's light traced shapes in the mist, pale and uncertain. A figure appeared just at the edge of the glow, almost human. Shadows stretched and twisted along its form. I stepped closer. The lantern swung away, maintaining its quiet orbit. The figure vanished, leaving only the lantern floating. I reached out. The air was cold, thick, almost static. The lantern swayed gently, inviting, distant. The fog wrapped around me. Every step stirred it, curling in cold fingers across my arms. The figure might have returned, or only lingered in memory. I followed slowly. The lantern brightened when I slowed, dimmed when I moved faster. Its movement was patient, precise. The figure's outline flickered once. Almost human, then gone again. The night smelled of damp leaves and old wood. Soft rustling followed me in the fog. Every sound seemed doubled, as if echoing from nowhere. I stopped. The lantern hovered. The fog pressed closer, brushing my skin. I could feel eyes, not on the lantern, not on the figure, but somewhere beyond, watching, waiting. I took another step. The lantern pulsed in response. Faint light rippling across the mist. The figure, or its memory, vanished completely. I let the fog carry my breath. Saw footsteps, quiet, following or imagined. The night smelled metallic now, cold and sharp. The lantern swung gently, patient, almost breathing. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Curiosity and dread mixed in the silence. I approached again. It drifted away, maintaining distance. The figure never returned. I stopped entirely. The fog wrapped around my legs. The lantern pulsed, steady and haunting. I could hear my own heartbeat in the quiet. The rustling of leaves, soft and deliberate. The night felt alive, patient, unyielding. I stepped back. The lantern hovered still, alone yet not. The figure's memory lingered. The fog held it, fragile, fleeting. The lantern swung slowly, quietly, keeping its silent watch. I turned and left. The lantern followed, distant but certain, until the fog swallowed both of us, leaving only night. The barn smelled of fresh hay and old timber. Moonlight fell through the broken roof, pale and soft. The air was still, thick with dust and the faint scent of earth. I stepped inside. The hay rustled under my boots. Something was off. Footprints appeared, fresh, deep, and deliberate. They did not match mine. I froze. The moonlight caught the edges of the prints. They led toward the loft stairs. The air pressed against my skin, cold and still. Every step I took stirred the hay, sending faint scents of earth and hay dust into my nose. The footprints moved ahead of me, yet unseen. I followed slowly. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight. The hay rustled softly, almost whispering. The prints climbed the loft stairs. Step by step they rose, then vanished mid-step. I paused. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp. A shiver ran down my spine. I looked around the barn. Shadows stretched long along the walls, twisting with the pale light. Alone, yet not. The hay rustled again. Soft, deliberate, as if someone or something moved just beyond sight. I reached the base of the loft stairs. The footprints had stopped. The silence pressed close. I could feel eyes, not warm, not human, watching from somewhere high, somewhere unseen. I breathed slowly. The hay pressed lightly against my boots. The smell of fresh hay and dust mingled with something faintly iron-like. I traced the path again with my gaze. Nothing, only shadows, still and patient. The barn held its quiet. The moonlight shifted, painting the walls with pale, uncertain shapes. The hay lay still for a moment. Then it moved again. A faint rustling, curling around my ankles. Alone, yet something lingered. I stepped back. The footprints did not return. The loft remained empty. The barn breathed around me. Soft, deliberate, patient. The shadows held their secrets. I left the footprints behind. The hay rustled faintly after me, and I felt it, still there, watching, waiting. The wind rattled the small attic door. The lock was old, rusted, stubborn. Moonlight spilled across the wooden boards, pale and cold. I searched the drawers in the room below. One that I knew had been empty now held a key. Cold metal pressed into my palm. I climbed the narrow stairs. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood. Each step groaned beneath me, echoing in the quiet. The attic door trembled. The lock turned with a soft click. A breath of wind carried through the small space. Inside, the attic was almost empty. Only an old trunk rested against the far wall. Dust hung thick in the pale light. I approached it slowly. The air felt heavier here, pressed close against my skin. A faint rustle drifted through the rafters. I lifted the lid. The trunk creaked, and the room seemed to breathe with it. A subtle, deliberate movement, almost alive. Shadows pulled along the corners. The moonlight caught the edges of the trunk, glinting faintly. A chill pressed against my neck. I leaned closer. The scent of old wood and decay rose in the air. Dust swirled with every subtle motion. A faint shadow lunged past the window. Gone when I blinked, yet the memory lingered, pressing at the edges of vision. The trunk lid moved slightly in my hands. The attic felt smaller, heavier, almost breathing with me. I could hear my pulse, slow and steady, echoing softly. The air smelled metallic now, sharp and close. Dust fell in tiny clouds, drifting in pale light. The shadows shifted, patient and still. I stepped back. The trunk remained open, empty. The attic waited. A soft breeze stirred the loose boards beneath my feet. The window rattled again. The shadow, perhaps gone, perhaps only hidden. I let the air fill my lungs slowly. The room pressed close around me, alive in its silence. Every breath seemed amplified, every sound deliberate. I lowered the lid. The trunk exhaled with a soft creak. The attic returned to its stillness. I turned toward the door. The lock rattled gently in the wind. The shadows lingered in the corners, patient, quiet. The attic smelled of old wood and lingering dust. The faint sense of presence pressed against my skin. I didn't move quickly. I didn't need to. The wind settled. The shadows held their secret. The attic breathed softly, waiting. I left slowly, leaving the key behind. The trunk, the shadows, the pale light, all remained, watching, patient. The farmhouse hall smelled of old wood and lingering cold. Moonlight fell in pale strips across the floorboards. Dust hung in the air, thick, almost tangible. I walked slowly. Every step pressed against silence. The boards groaned faintly under my weight. A cold breath touched my neck. Soft, deliberate, impossible. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against my skin. I froze. The windows showed nothing outside, only darkness and stillness. Whispers echoed from the walls. Not words, but thoughts. Repeating mine, soft and patient. I spun. Nothing. Only shadows leaning against the corners. The hall stretched endlessly. The pale light fractured across the floor, casting shifting shapes. I could feel eyes pressing close. The cold breath returned. Soft, insistent, brushing along my nape. I shivered. I stepped forward slowly. The dust stirred under my boots. Every sound echoed in the still air. The whispers pressed closer. Soft, almost intimate. Repeating fragments of thoughts I hadn't spoken. I stopped. The air felt heavier here. The floorboards beneath my feet seemed to sigh. Shadows shifted in the corners. The moonlight caught the edges, forming shapes almost human, yet they remained just beyond reach. I could hear my own heartbeat in the silence. The cold pressed against my skin again. The whispers moved with it. I turned, slowly, every sense stretched. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, except the air itself. The hall smelled faintly of old wood, dust, and something sharp, metallic. I could feel the tension pressing at my shoulders. Alone yet watched. The cold lingered, brushing lightly just behind. The whispers repeated, patient and quiet. Every word, my own thoughts, echoed back. I took a slow breath. The hall seemed to inhale with me. The shadows leaned in, attentive. I stepped forward. The cold faded slightly. The whispers softened, but the sense of being watched remained. I stopped, letting the silence press against my skin. The moonlight fractured across the boards. The shadows remained in corners, patient, quiet. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only listened, felt, and waited. The farmhouse hall held me in its quiet. The cold, the whispers, the watching, all patient, all still. I exhaled softly. The tension lingered faint, persistent, and I remained alone yet not. The fog lay thick beyond the fence line. It clung to the grass, wet and cold. The air smelled faintly of earth and frost. A figure stood there, pale clothes, still as stone, motionless, watching, distant. I stepped closer. The grass whispered beneath my boots. The air pressed gently against my skin. The figure vanished. Only a faint outline lingered in the fog. A memory pressed into the air, fragile, fading. The cold brushed against my face. The outline shimmered faintly in pale light. I could feel sorrow radiating from it, quiet, deep. I reached out. The air was empty yet heavy. The outline pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat I could almost feel. Shadows curled around the fog. Rustling leaves whispered in the distance. The figure's presence pressed softly against the edges of my senses. I walked closer. The outline swayed, delicate, fragile. It was not human, yet it seemed to ache with longing. The air smelled faintly metallic now. A chill brushed down my spine. Soft footsteps echoed my own, or imagined. The fog shifted. The pale visitor remained, a memory hovering in the gray. Longing and sorrow emanated, patient, silent. I paused. The wind carried a faint hum, almost melodic. The outline flickered, delicate as smoke. I could feel the air press against my skin. The fog carried the weight of its presence. Alone, yet not. I stepped closer still. The outline wavered, almost dissolving. The sorrow felt heavier, tangible, pressing against my chest. I reached out again. The outline recoiled slightly, then softened. It lingered, patient, ephemeral. The shadows moved in the fog. Rustling leaves whispered. The pale visitor remained, watching, waiting. I exhaled slowly. The fog held the figure's memory, pressing it gently against the night. I felt the melancholy, soft and persistent. I stepped back. The outline faded slightly, dissolving into the mist. The sorrow remained, lingering in the air. The figure vanished completely. Only the fog, soft and cold, remained. The night smelled faintly of wet earth and frost. I turned and walked away. The fence line held its emptiness, silent, patient. The memory of the pale visitor pressed against the fog. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only felt it. Longing, sorrow, and quiet attention. The fog swallowed the outline. The night held its melancholy. I walked slowly, leaving the pale visitor behind, yet not entirely gone. The barnyard smelled of rust and damp earth. Moonlight spilled across the old tractor, pale and hesitant. The air felt thick, cold, almost alive. It creaked. A deep, deliberate groan, like metal breathing. I stepped closer, drawn despite the unease. The tractor shifted, slowly, impossibly, as if steering away on its own. The wheels left faint impressions in the dirt, soft and deliberate. Shadows stretched from its frame, long, twisting, forming shapes like hands. They reached toward me. I froze. The cold pressed against my skin. The earth smelled faintly of oil and rust. I stumbled back. My breath caught in my chest. The tractor groaned again, patient, deliberate. The shadows curled around the wheels. They leaned closer, reaching, patient. The moonlight caught their edges, pale and trembling. I could feel my heartbeat in the silence. The night pressed in, heavy and quiet. Every sound, my own steps, the rustling air, was amplified. I tried to move closer. The tractor shifted slightly, distancing itself. The shadows followed, stretching, reaching, patient. The air smelled faintly metallic. The dirt pressed cold against my hands as I steadied myself. I could feel the unease crawling along my spine. I paused. The tractor groaned softly, almost like a breath. The shadows curled tighter around the wheels, patient, deliberate. I watched the movement, careful, slow. The night felt alive, pressing against my senses. The shadows seemed almost sentient, waiting. I stepped back again. The tractor remained still, patient. The shadows held their shapes, stretching and curling. The air smelled faintly of rust and damp grass. The night pressed close. Alone yet not. I exhaled slowly. The tractor creaked, shifted slightly, but stayed. The shadows lingered in the pale moonlight, patient, quiet. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only watched, heart steadying, breath slow. The barnyard held its silence. The tractor, the shadows, the cold, all waiting. The night carried its patient dread. I finally turned, leaving space between us. The shadows stretched one last time, then held. The tractor groaned softly in the moonlight. I walked away slowly. The earth pressed lightly beneath my boots. The cold, the shadows, the tractor, all remained. The fields lay still under a pale moon. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and earth. Fog curled low, soft and cold, around the stalks. A child's laughter drifted across the night. Light, high, almost fragile. It teased the edges of my senses. I stepped forward slowly. The grass pressed against my ankles, wet and cold. The laughter came again, closer, yet unseen. I strained my eyes. Nothing moved among the stalks. Only the fog curling, shifting. The laughter twisted slightly. Warped, faint, almost teasing. It echoed softly against the still night. I followed it, careful, deliberate. Each step pressed into the damp earth. The air felt heavy, thick with quiet. The laughter grew fainter. Stretching, bending, playing at the edges of hearing. I felt a chill press against my shoulders. I stopped. The fog wrapped around me like a thin, cold sheet. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the damp. The echo returned. Soft, intimate, almost human. It whispered my own name. I shivered. The fields pressed close, silent, patient. The laughter lingered, faint, teasing, distant. I stepped back slowly. The fog shifted, curling through the grass. Shadows leaned in, patient. Still, the night pressed against my skin. The air carried faint echoes of the laughter. Each whisper lingered, fragile and deliberate. I breathed slowly. The grass whispered beneath my boots. The fog pressed against my cheeks. The laughter faded again. Soft, distant, yet impossible to ignore. It carried the weight of attention. Waiting, I paused. The field smelled faintly of wet earth, frost, and memory. The wind moved gently, stirring the fog. The echoes pressed at the edges of my hearing. Warped, teasing, patient. My name floated back softly, almost tender. I turned. The night remained still, patient, silent. The laughter was gone. Only the memory remained. I walked slowly back. The fog wrapped around me, soft and cold. The fields held their secrets, patient and quiet. The echo lingered faintly in my mind. The child's laughter, warped and teasing, whispered in the spaces between the stalks. And in the quiet, it felt like it waited for me. The back hall smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Moonlight spilled in thin stripes across the floor. The air pressed soft and cold against my skin. I noticed the doorway. I hadn't seen it before. It appeared suddenly, subtle, almost hesitant. The door led into a small room, empty, except for a rocking cradle. The wood was pale, smooth, almost glowing in the moonlight. The walls pulsed softly, not with light, but as if breathing. The air vibrated faintly with the rhythm, soft and slow. I stepped closer. The floorboards whispered beneath my boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the dust. The cradle swayed gently, alone, yet it moved, patient and deliberate. Shadows stretched along the edges of the walls, leaning slightly. I blinked. The doorway vanished. The hall was empty, quiet, unchanged yet different. A faint hum lingered in the air, soft, melodic, like the echo of a lullaby. I could feel it pressing lightly against my skin. I leaned closer to where the doorway had been. The air felt thick, almost viscous. A faint chill brushed along my shoulders. The rocking stopped. The walls pulsed slower now, deliberate, patient. The room or memory of it hovered in the edges of my sight. I exhaled slowly. The hall smelled of dust and cold wood. The silence pressed softly, waiting. I stepped back, cautious. The doorway remained gone. Only the faint rhythm of the walls lingered. The air felt alive. Shadows stretched slightly, leaning at impossible angles. The cradle's memory swayed in the corners of my vision. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only felt, quietly, the presence of something missing. The hall pressed close around me. Every breath stirred dust in the moonlight. The faint hum lingered softly, like a sigh. I turned slowly. The doorway had vanished completely. The hall remained silent, still, patient. The rocking cradle was gone. The pulsing walls no longer breathed. Only the memory remained, soft, subtle, unnerving. I walked slowly away. The floorboards whispered beneath my boots. The night pressed against my skin. I could feel it there. The doorway, the room, lingering in the edges of my senses. Patient, quiet, surreal. I exhaled again. The hall smelled faintly of old wood and dust. The memory pressed softly, waiting for a blink or a breath. The cornfields stretched tall under a pale moon. The stalks whispered against each other, brushing softly in the cold night air. The soil smelled faintly of damp earth and decay. I stepped forward. The stalks shifted. Figures emerged, tall and still, watching me. The air felt heavier. My breath pressed foggy in front of me. The figures remained silent, patient, immovable. I tried to step away. The path twisted back toward them. Each step curved, bending, pulling me closer. Rustling grew louder. Whispers pressed against my ears, soft and teasing. The corn stalks brushed my arms, cold and damp. I stopped. The figures didn't move, yet they watched. The air hummed faintly, almost like a sigh. I pushed forward. Every step stirred dust and wet leaves. The whispers pressed louder, curling around my senses. The figures shifted slightly. Human-like shapes, yet impossible. They leaned closer, in the edges of my vision. Panic pressed against my chest. The cornfield felt alive, bending, breathing. The stalks brushed my skin with unseen fingers. I stumbled. The ground was soft, uneven beneath my boots. Rustling echoed in every direction. I looked up. The moon hung pale, distant, cold. The figures remained patient, unmoving. I reached a clearing. The whispers stopped abruptly. The rustling faded, curling back into the stalks. The figures were gone. The corn swayed gently in the still night. Only the memory lingered, patient, quiet. I breathed slowly. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and frost. The field pressed softly around the edges of my senses. I stepped forward cautiously. The path felt uncertain, still bending. The shadows had vanished, yet their gaze lingered in memory. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only felt the quiet dread, pressing softly, lingering. The cornfield remained still. Moonlight sifted through the stalks, pale and cold. The night held its silence, patient and waiting. I walked slowly out of the clearing. The soil whispered beneath my boots. The air pressed gently against my skin. I could still feel them. The figures, the whispers, the shadows, lingering just beyond vision, patient, quiet, watching. The main room smelled faintly of old wood and wax. Moonlight spilled across the floorboards in pale, uneven stripes. The air was cool, pressing soft against my skin. The clock ticked, backward. Each chime stretched longer than it should, lingering in the still air. I watched the hands crawl opposite their normal path. Slow, deliberate. The rhythm pressed against my chest, unmooring me from certainty. Shadows stretched from the corners, warped, elongated, patient. They leaned toward me without moving. The air felt thick, like velvet pressing against my skin. A faint hum lingered beneath the ticking. It pulsed in time with the backward chimes. I stepped closer. The floorboards whispered beneath my boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp against the dust. The chime echoed again, longer, deeper. It pressed into my chest, pulling at something I couldn't name. Time felt unsteady. Moments folded over each other, slowly, deliberately, like water moving backward. The shadows twisted slightly. Edges leaned in impossible angles. Their presence pressed faintly, insistent, patient. I breathed slowly. The cold air pressed against my cheeks. The ticking pressed in my mind, curling thoughts back on themselves. I reached toward the clock. The wood felt cold beneath my fingertips. The chimes lingered, stretching in space and memory. The shadows drew closer, silent, patient, warped by the backward time. The room pressed around me, thick and alive. I stepped back. The ticking continued, insistent. The air hummed faintly with its rhythm. I blinked. The shadows remained, patient and quiet. Time pressed against me, heavy, unsteady, surreal. I exhaled slowly. The moonlight caught the dust in the air. Each particle seemed to drift backward, suspended in the backward rhythm. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only felt the slow pull of time, patient and insistent. The chime echoed again, lingering, stretching, unmooring. The shadows leaned, warped and quiet. From the corners, the room felt alive. The clock, the chimes, the air, all pressed gently against my senses, patient, surreal. I turned away slowly. The ticking remained, stretching, pressing, echoing. The shadows leaned back into corners, waiting, silent. Time remained unsteady. The air smelled faintly of wax and dust. The room held its slow, quiet unease. I stepped softly across the floorboards. Each tick pressed against my chest. Each shadow lingered, patient, quiet, watching. I breathed. The backward ticking filled the silence. The room waited. The night air was warm, heavy with the scent of damp earth and grass. Moonlight spilled in pale stripes across the floor. The farmhouse felt quiet, almost too quiet, pressing softly against my senses. One window caught my eye. Frost clung stubbornly to glass. The air around it smelled faintly cold, metallic, though the night was warm. I stepped closer. The frost was thick, patterns curling like frozen fingers. My breath fogged faintly against the glass. A handprint appeared, inside the frost. No one was there. I froze. The print pressed against the glass, faint but certain. The cold pressed against my fingertips when I reached toward it. The air shifted. A whisper hissed my name, soft, curling against my ear. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and frost. I trembled. My fingers lingered against the cold glass. The frost pressed against my skin, like it wanted me to stay. I felt drawn, unable to pull away. The whisper circled me, faint, patient. The window seemed to breathe beneath my touch. The handprint remained. Fingers splayed, frozen mid-gesture. It pressed gently into my memory, almost alive. I blinked. The glass shimmered faintly. A cold hum pressed beneath the whisper, low and insistent. I leaned closer. The frost scratched faintly against my cheek. The whisper lingered, patient, soft, insistent. I felt my heart press against my chest. The handprint did not fade. It was patient, waiting, silent. I touched it fully. The cold bit into my skin, sharp and alive. The whisper followed, curling softly around my thoughts. I stepped back. The frost shimmered faintly in the pale moonlight. The handprint remained impossibly clear. The air pressed against my face. The whisper lingered, curling like smoke. The window felt alive, patient, silent, watching. I didn't move quickly. I didn't speak. I only felt the cold press of the glass and the softness of my name. The night remained warm, the farmhouse quiet, yet the frozen window waited, patient, untouched, yet alive in memory. I turned slowly away. The frost remained. The handprint lingered, and the whisper pressed softly, even as I left. The dirt path lay faint beneath my feet, pale and broken in the fog. The woods pressed close, scent of damp leaves and cold soil heavy in the air. Every step sank slightly into wet earth, quiet but certain beneath me. I followed the path, or at least I thought I did. The fog thickened, curling around the trees, swallowing familiar shapes. The outline of the barn faded first, then the old fence. The wind carried only whispers, soft, rustling through the leaves. I turned a corner, and the path seemed to bend back on itself. A familiar tree, gnarled and silent, appeared where I had just passed. I blinked. The path stretched in the same curve, the same softened dent in the dirt. My footsteps echoed, but no sound returned except my own. A shape lingered in the shadows, faint, pale, almost human, watching from the fog. I stopped. It remained still, patient. I tried to walk faster. The ground felt colder beneath my feet. The fog pressed against my face like wet cloth. Every turn led back. The same crooked tree, the same bend in the path. The forest hummed quietly around me. I felt the weight of eyes, not from above, but beside me, a static pull in the air, pulling my senses off balance. I breathed in sharply. The smell of damp moss and wet bark filled my lungs. The shadows shifted, almost imperceptibly, closer but never fully seen. I stumbled. Leaves rustled under my hands and knees. A whisper drifted through the fog, soft, teasing. My name, drawn long, almost like a question. I tried to remember landmarks. A broken branch, a rock, moss-covered. But each mark disappeared as soon as I noticed it. The path was no longer a path. Only fog, cold dirt, and shadows. Each turn, each step, brought me back to the same curve, the same tree. The shape watched still. No face, only form. Its presence pressed against me, silent but heavy. I tried to call out. My voice echoed, too soft, too far away. The fog swallowed it instantly. I kept moving. The earth seemed to shift beneath me, ever slightly. I was not lost in the forest, but in the fog itself. The shadow blinked, just once, gone when I turned my eyes fully. Only the path remained, or what I thought was a path. I stopped again. The silence was thick. The air hummed faintly, pressing against my ears. I felt the panic rise slowly, curling around my chest. The path that should have led forward, now circling endlessly. The fog, dense and cold, wrapped around my ankles, my senses, my mind. I could not see beyond the mist, could not tell left from right. The shadow lingered, patient, almost waiting. The path stretched ahead, but it led nowhere. Or maybe back. I could not tell. I breathed in slowly, felt the cold bite at my skin, heard the soft rustling of leaves that were not moved by wind. The forest remained silent, except for the faint whisper curling in my ears. My name, soft, drawn, insistent. I stepped forward again, and the path vanished beneath my feet. The fog swallowed everything, and I realized I was no longer walking on earth at all, but in the fog itself. The field stretched pale beneath a thin mist. The night air was cool, scented with damp earth and fallen leaves. Alone, I walked slowly, boots pressing softly into the soft ground. Then I saw it, an enormous tree, hollow at its base, standing like a sentinel. Its bark was dark and rough, twisted with age. A faint light glimmered within the hollow. Glowing eyes, barely there, stared out from the shadowed depths. I froze. The fog curled around the trunk, moving unnaturally. It whispered along the grass, swirling at my feet, pulling softly at my coat. The roots trembled under the weight of something unseen. I stepped closer. The air grew thick, scented with wet wood and cold soil. A faint hum threaded through the night, low, vibrating in my chest. The eyes blinked slowly, not with malice, but with patience. A quiet insistence, drawing me closer. A whisper rose from the roots. Soft, insistent. Enter. I crouched, brushing a hand against the rough bark. It was cold, damp, almost alive beneath my fingers. The hollow beckoned, dark and deep, and I could feel the fog curling inside, waiting. A rustle came from within. Soft footsteps, though the ground was empty. The eyes remained glowing faintly, watching. The fog wrapped around my legs, rising slightly, shifting with a will of its own. I felt a breath of cold air against my neck. The whispering rose. Faint words tangled with the wind, urging me to move closer. I stepped forward. The grass whispered beneath my feet. The hollow seemed to expand, darkness stretching further than it should, swallowing the fog whole. I could hear something breathing inside. Steady, slow. Not mine. The eyes blinked again, and I noticed faint shapes moving behind them. Shadows, elongated, pressing against the edges of the hollow. They leaned toward me, but never emerged. I reached out. The air inside the hollow felt soft, almost liquid, pulling at my fingertips. A whisper coiled around my ear. Come closer. The fog thickened, wrapping around the tree trunk, around me. The whispering grew warmer, pressing against my chest. I could feel it inside my bones, gentle, insistent, inviting. I paused. The field was silent beyond the tree. No wind, no rustle, only the fog and a hollow in the glowing eyes. I crouched again at the entrance. The darkness seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting slowly. Something within shifted. Just at the edge of my vision, a cold draft touched my cheek, smelling faintly of earth and something else, old, distant, lost. The whisper pressed at my mind. I wanted to step inside. Curiosity and fear tangled like fingers in my chest. The eyes blinked once more, patient, waiting. I held my breath. The fog swirled higher, wrapping the hollow in a halo of mist. The whispering eased slightly, as though it knew I hesitated. I traced the edge of the hollow with a trembling hand. The wood was smooth in places, hollowed by time. A pulse ran through it, soft, almost like a heartbeat. I leaned closer, listening. The roots shivered beneath me. The eyes stayed unblinking, fixed, patient. A single thought rose inside me. Do I enter or step back? The fog clung to my coat, brushing against my face. The whispering ebbed and flowed. The hollow seemed to breathe, slow and deep. I stepped back. The tree remained, towering and hollow. The eyes faded slightly, watching still, patient. The whispers faded into the night. The fog swirled around the trunk one last time. I could feel the pull, quiet, insistent, as if the tree itself remembered me. I stood alone in the field. The hollow remained, silent now, and I wonder if it had ever truly been empty at all. The farmhouse sat quiet beneath the night sky. The wind had stilled. Only the faint hum of the earth seemed to move beneath the floorboards. I wandered through the main room. Dust swirled in pale moonlight, slipping through curtains. The air smelled faintly of old wood and cold linen. Then the radio sputtered. A static has filled the room, sharp and sudden. It rattled softly on the table, alone, unplugged as if moved by some unseen hand. I stepped closer. The static shifted, forming shapes in the air. Faint cries rose from a noise, barely discernible. And then my name, whispered, soft, urgent, and impossibly close. I reached to turn it off. The dial clicked. The knob spun under my fingers. Silence should have followed, but it did not. The whispers continued, now coming from the walls. Low, invasive. I pressed my ear to the wood. The boards pulsed beneath my skin, cold and alive. The cries twisted, echoing my thoughts, repeating, circling. I backed away. The air smelled of ozone and old paper. The static lingered faintly in the corners of my ears, though the radio was silent. A shadow flickered against the wall. Not my own. Something long and thin, brushing past the edge of vision. The whispers grew sharper. Closer. My name, again, drawn out in a way that felt like breath against my neck. I moved toward the kitchen. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet. Each step was mirrored by a soft echo that was not mine. The radio clicked again, tiny bursts of static slipping into the silence. And with it, whispers that almost formed words. Voices of children, perhaps, or maybe of something older, hiding beneath the wood. I froze. The room held its breath with me. The air seemed to tighten, pressing against my chest. The whispers came from every angle now. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor, all around, soft and insistent. I pressed my palms against the radio. It vibrated under my hands, as if breathing. A faint warmth radiated from it, unnatural against the cool night air. The static formed patterns in the dark, flickers of light across the dust motes, shifting like tiny shadows dancing in a storm. I blinked. They were gone. I stepped back. The whispers continued. Now a thread of laughter twisted through them, warped and faint. I leaned against the wall. The boards hummed beneath my fingers, cold and alive. The radio remained still, but the whispers, they lingered, patient, waiting. I tried to speak. My voice faltered, swallowed by the pressure of the room. Only my breath moved, soft and shallow. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed. But the whispers tugged gently at the edges of my mind, drawing me back to the radio. A faint, desperate cry pierced the static. Then my name again, whispered, soft, carrying a longing I could not place. I stepped away, heart pounding. The radio remained, Silent now. The room smelled faintly of dust and electricity. I moved toward the hallway. The whispers receded slightly, like a tide withdrawing, but I could still feel them in the walls, soft and waiting. Outside, the wind stirred faintly. The farmhouse settled back into silence. The radio sat alone, a heartbeat in the dark, and I knew it would call again. The farmhouse sat under a sky thick with clouds. No moon, no stars. I moved through the hallways, barefoot on cold wood. The air smelled faintly of dust and damp plaster. Every breath felt heavy, pulled tight in my chest. Then the lights flickered. A brief, pale glow across the ceiling, then gone. Darkness swallowed the corners, but for an instant, shapes moved. Shadows leapt across the walls. Tall, thin, fluid. When I focused on them, they vanished. I took a step forward. The floorboards groaned beneath me. Each creak echoed, bouncing between the walls like a distant whisper. The lights flickered again. Now the hallway shimmered in fragments of pale yellow. I could see the outlines of furniture. Then something that wasn't furniture. A figure. Crouched at the edge of the glow. It blurred when I blinked. I tried to follow its motion with my eyes, but dissolved into shadow. I pressed my palm to the wall. Cold, damp. The plaster seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips. Alive, breathing. The flickering lights continued, strobing the rooms in sudden flashes. I caught glimpses of walls that weren't there moments before, doors I didn't recognize, archways curling into darkness. I felt trapped. No matter which way I turned, the lights pulled me back. The hall twisted, bending in ways it had not minutes ago. A faint rustling came from the kitchen. I moved toward it. The lights blinked, revealing a shadow stretching across the floor. It didn't move toward me. It didn't move away. It simply lingered, waiting, shifting with each flicker. I stopped, breath shallow. The air smelled faintly of ozone, like before a storm, though the night was still. The lights flared brighter for a heartbeat. The shadow leapt into something human-shaped. A face, just a glimpse, blurred, pale, without features. Then darkness again. I tried the front door. Locked. The keyhole was empty, cold metal under my fingers. I moved back to the hall. The lights flickered faster, shadows multiplying. Every flicker stretched time. Moments seemed longer, as if the house itself was breathing slowly around me. I pressed myself against the wall, though it felt warm now, almost pulsing beneath my palm. I could hear faint whispers. Not words, just sighs, static-like murmurs brushing at my ears. The flickering paused. The house held its breath. Then one final flash revealed the hall empty. No shadow, no figure. The silence pressed in, heavier than before. I could still feel the glow on my skin, faint and uneven, trapped in the flickering. The house seemed endless. I wanted to move, to escape. But the lights, they whispered in their own way, guiding, corralling, shaping the darkness. I stood alone. The farmhouse settled into stillness, but the flickering lingered behind closed eyes in the corners of my mind. A soft, unsettling rhythm, pulsing, waiting. The upstairs hall smelled faintly of old wood and winter air. No wind stirred the curtains. The night was still, heavy. I stepped forward. The floorboards were ice-cold beneath my bare feet. Each step echoed, hollow and thin, stretching down the dark corridor. I paused. A soft creak. High above, the upper room should have been empty. A faint hum seemed to rise from the walls, like the house itself was breathing, slow and deliberate. I moved again. The cold sank into my toes, creeping upward. My skin prickled, goose flesh rising under my sleeves. Another creak, this time closer. A door moved. Slowly, ever so slowly, a top hinge groaned. The door swung open, a pale sliver of darkness spilling into the hall. I froze, silence pressing from all sides. Even the cold seemed to pause, waiting. The shadows along the walls twisted slightly. Shapes formed at the edge of my vision, tall, thin, unmoving. I lifted my hand. The air felt colder there than the floor. Fingers numb, I traced a line along the wall, feeling the rough plaster under my touch. Another creak above me. Steps, though no one should be walking. Each footfall slow, measured, deliberate. The door groaned again, wider this time. The darkness behind it seemed to inhale, drawing the hall into its fold. I moved toward it. The cold intensified, biting through my socks, up my legs. The air smelled faintly of damp cloth and old cedar, as if the house was holding on to its history. I stopped at the threshold. The room beyond was dark, yet not entirely black. Shadows pulled along the edges, stretching toward me. A soft whisper brushed my ear. Not words, just breath. Cold, dry, empty of life. The floor beneath me seemed to shift. I felt it would tilt subtly, a slow motion I couldn't explain. I swallowed. The sound echoed louder than I expected, bouncing off the walls. I stepped back. The door began to swing, slowly closed. Not with wind, not with gravity. It moved as though the house itself was breathing, folding the space around me. Another creak above. A single step, then silence. The kind that fills the air with weight, pressing down on chest and mind alike. I traced my fingers along the cold floorboards. The chill seeped into bones, lingering, stubborn. The walls seemed to hum in response. I breathed slowly. The cold remained. The shadows lingered. The door hung half open. I felt alone. Alone but not empty. A faint static, almost imperceptible, seemed to vibrate through the floor. I could feel it in the soles of my feet, under my skin. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. The shadows remained at the edges, watching, waiting. I stepped forward once more. The door finally ceased its slow swing, still open, still dark. No one appeared. No footsteps followed. I paused. The chill began to fade slowly, though the memory of it remained. The hall felt quieter now, but the silence was thick, lingering, like smoke in a closed room. I did not move again for a long time. The house whispered in its own way, through the cold floorboards, through the distant creaks, through the shadows that did not leave. And I waited, listening, feeling alone, yet watched. The house smelled of damp wood and faint decay. Even the air seemed to hesitate in the hallways, heavy and still. Outside, the wind was silent, though a faint hum lingered in the walls. I touched the doorframe. A pale handprint gleamed faintly where none should be, cold to the touch, as if the house itself had pressed against me. I stepped closer. The handprint blurred and faded under my fingers. A whisper of warmth, then nothing. I turned the corner. Another handprint appeared on the window pane, smudged, imperfect, yet unmistakably there. I reached out. It vanished again, only to reappear elsewhere, higher, lower, along another frame. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The air smelled faintly of cold smoke and old linen. Every step echoed, yet no one followed. I held my breath. The house seemed alive, watching, shifting, waiting. The handprints moved as if amused. I followed them, along the staircase. Pale fingers traced the rail, sliding along the varnish. I brushed my hand along it. Nothing remained, yet the chill lingered. Shadows stretched along the walls. They shifted and shimmered with the flickering candlelight. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. A faint creak. High above, another handprint appeared on the ceiling beam. I reached up instinctively. The print faded before my fingertips could touch it. I stepped into the hall. The house seemed to breathe around me. Floorboard sighed. Walls whispered. A door trembled under its own weight. Another handprint glowed faintly on the door. I moved closer. It vanished again. Every approach made the house feel playful, cruel, alive. The air shifted, colder, denser. I could hear my own pulse, each beat echoing between the walls, rustling from the corners of the rooms, soft and deliberate. I reached for the window. The handprint appeared there, pale and wet-looking. I pressed my palm against the glass. The cold seeped into my skin, lingering, impossible to shake. I stepped back. Another appeared on the opposite wall. The house seemed to smile through its silence. A cruel, teasing, patient smile. The hall twisted. Shadows danced. Each handprint marked a new path, a new boundary I could not cross. The air was thick, almost viscous, pressing against my lungs. I whispered my own name. The walls echoed it back, warped and distant. The handprints moved again, just out of reach, leaving me chasing shadows. I touched the floor, cold beneath my fingertips. The air smelled of wet earth and faint decay. The house breathed around me, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I paused in the center of the hall. No handprint within reach. Yet they were everywhere, moving just beyond perception. The house watched, patient, cruel, alive. I did not move for long moments. The handprints vanished, reappeared, shifted. The chill sank deep into my bones. Every breath, every heartbeat, felt drawn into the house itself. I backed toward the staircase. The prints lingered at the edges of my vision. Every corner, every doorway, another trace of that pale, impossible touch. I realized I could never reach them. They were everywhere and nowhere at once. The house laughed in its silence. I shivered. The air settled, heavy and still. Yet I knew the handprints would return, each one a teasing reminder, a proof that the house was alive, and I was merely part of its game. The field lay quiet beneath a pale, fog sky. Dew soaked the grass, cold and heavy against my ankles. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and distant smoke. A figure stood at the edge, still as stone, pale, silent, watching. Its presence made the fog feel thicker, heavier, almost breathing. I stepped closer. The ground squished beneath my boots. Every rustle of grass sounded too loud in the stillness. The figure did not move. Its eyes, if it had them, were empty, distant, endless. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the mist. A chill ran down my spine. The wind whispered through the stalks, carrying faint, almost human sighs. I paused, listening. The whispers were back, endless, low, curling around me. I took another step. The fog thickened, curling around my knees, rising with each breath I drew. The figure wavered, then disappeared, swallowed by the white haze. I froze, a heartbeat of silence. Then rustling, soft, deliberate footsteps, though no one was there. The pale outline lingered in the fog. Memory pressed into the air. It did not blink. It did not move. It simply waited. I reached out, hand trembling. The mist seemed to thicken, pressing against my fingers, cold and wet. A faint hum vibrated in my chest. The whispers rose again, insistent, circling my thoughts. The ground beneath me shifted, soggy, uneven. Every step forward brought the sensation of being watched. I could hear my own breath, ragged and slow, as if the air itself weighed on me. I blinked, and the figure was gone. The fog swallowed it entirely, leaving only empty space. Yet I knew it was there, beyond the pale mist, watching, waiting, patient. The whispers wrapped around me, indistinct, echoing, endlessly repeating my name. I tried to speak. My voice was swallowed, muffled by the dense, damp air. I stumbled forward. The field curved unnaturally, each step looping me back toward the same spot. The figure, or its absence, remained constant, a pale anchor in the sea of fog. I crouched in the wet grass. The cold seeped into my bones. The hum in the air grew louder, resonating against my rib cage. Rustling shifted nearby, though nothing moved. The whispers whispered not just my name, but my fears, each one tangled with the damp fog, curling around my limbs, my neck, my chest. I tried to run. The ground held me, sticky and unyielding. A shadow passed through the mist. I turned. Nothing, yet the air smelled of smoke, distant and acrid, curling around my hair, my skin. I rose slowly. The field was endless, yet the figure's presence made it feel claustrophobic. A soft footstep echoed behind me. Another, always just beyond reach. I whispered a prayer I had not known I knew. The fog answered in kind. The whispers swelled, endless and suffocating. I could feel them pressing in, closer than the cold, closer than the air. I stepped forward again. The figure flickered at the edge of my vision, pale and still. I blinked and it vanished. The fog hung, thick, unyielding. I realized then I was not alone, not in this field, not in the house, not in the world I thought I knew. The whispers continued, a chorus of soft, persistent voices, each one pressing against my mind. The mist curled around me, wrapping me in cold, wet fingers. The pale figure was gone. The field stretched endlessly, empty yet alive. And yet, somewhere in the fog, it waited. I shivered. The damp air clung to my skin. The whispers circled me, echoing in my chest. I could not see them. I could not touch them. But I knew I was not alone. The fog pressed closer. The cold seeped deeper. And somewhere, always, just beyond the mist, the figure watched.